My name is Jason.
My name is Judd.
And this is The Sixth Ring, a discussion about the Trophy tabletop role-playing game.
Our theme for today is beginnings. That makes sense, because this is our first episode.
Setting out.
Judd, I know that you had a chance to run a session of Trophy Gold a few nights ago. Any high points you want to talk about, or moments where the game's mechanics clicked into place for you?
Yeah, I feel like every time I've been playing, something else occurs to me that I'm like, oh, wow, I like this little thing, which is funny because it doesn't seem like, I don't think it is a rules-dense game, but I think there's more to it than people think. I think it's one of those games that it's surprising. The drive has been interesting me. I love how the drives are all filled with things that aren't defined, and it's like the player's first hint that they can say something about the world. I've noticed that the drives are where players are kind of like adding things that they like or letting me know what they're interested in or adding a little bit. It's their little place to kind of start the collaboration. And it's right there on the character sheet from the go. And I really dig that.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like what you said about how the game kind of reveals itself as you play, because I think that's really true. So when Jesse pitched this to me, what feels like 100 years ago now at this point, but when he pitched this to me and he showed me the basic rules, and even after we published it, honestly, I didn't realize like how much work some of the rules were doing. And like some of the rules are like 2 sentences and they're like massively important to how the game plays.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Like I tell people all the time, okay, just run it like it says to run it. Your temptation is to do something different or to change something, but don't. Like, trust me, Jesse has thought about this and play tested this so much and like just do it the way it says and it's going to be great. I find that to be the case too. So when I started running it really regularly, I had a similar experience. Like it started to reveal itself. And you're right about the drives. I think what's interesting about the drives is you're right. Like, because it's right there on the character sheet, because it's one of the first decisions that a player has to make, it does signal to them like, oh, I get to help create this world, right? Because here's what the players do. They go, well, what does it mean to be in Barsool prison? Or what is an heir of Nagane?
Yeah.
Or what? And you're like, I don't know. What do you think it is?
Yeah.
It's whatever you think it is.
And the other thing is it allows me to tell them, I don't know. And if you don't know, that's okay. We'll figure it out. Like because there are some players who are like, I know just what it is. Retiring to whatever is like this kind of Jack Vancian thing where like they put these goggles on you and you see this paradise and it's all fake, but I'm going to pay my 50 gold and do it because I just want like a fake paradise for my declining years.
Yeah.
And I'm like, cool. And then the heir of Nagane is one of them because all the guys who I've been playing with rolled their characters randomly and took the first ones they took. So, yeah, the guy who had the heir of Nagane was like, I don't know what that is yet. And like, it was like the third session in, he was like, I know who the heir of Nagane is now. I know it's this.
Right. Yeah.
Back when I was a pickpocket, she was this noble woman, and we had this like one night together where we like hung out and had this crazy night in the town, and I'm going to go find her again. And yeah, it was interesting that, you know, and of course it was like, oh, and the cobra with the flame around it that was on the tomb in the serpent people folk tomb, that was her family sigil. And I'm like, oh, right. Wow. Yeah. So it's just suddenly like so much world building happens in there and it's neat. I'm impressed with it.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Let's go to the next segment.
Sounds good.
Clawing for gold.
So in this segment, we're going to focus on some third-party content, and we wanted to talk about The Paper Flesh Advent by author Speak the Sky. Shall I give a quick overview of what it's about?
Yeah, sure. Hit it.
So The Paper Flesh Advent is a Trophy Dark incursion. It appears to be set in the world of Trophy because it makes a lot of references to the established setting elements that we've done for Trophy. And the idea is that there is this order, this cult, I suppose, who have basically this practice where they create mellified men. Now, a mellified man is a person who has been ritualistically soaked in honey. That's my understanding of it anyway. And pieces of the mellified men have started to reach the civilized world, and a bit of thumb, a bit of flesh or whatever, and they're very valuable. The incursion never says quite why. I think it's presumed that you eat it, but in any case, if you can get your hands on like a whole arm or a leg of mellified man, you're like set for life. And so the treasure hunters are going into the incursion space to locate this cult in order to get some mellified man for their own. So Judd, we've both read this. What did you think about it?
It's gruesome. Yeah, and it starts with that. It starts just with that description of what the mellified man is. And it says, this is where it happened actually in history. And you should talk about this with your players before and go from there. And it's just so gruesome. I couldn't help but think what kind of candy you'd have on the table.
Like while you're playing.
Oh my. Like, would anyone eat it? Like, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Is there like a mass market honey candy? I'm trying to think. What would there be?
Isn't there one with like a honeybee on it? I can't think of it. I can't think of the name of it.
Yeah. It's like a taffy. It's,
yeah.
I used to love them. I can't think of the name of it now. Like good and honey or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, that's. I may never eat those the same way again. Yeah, it's so gruesome. Well, so it's gruesome, but I will also say that it's really well written. So for starters, it kicks off with a poem, which I'm always a sucker for. I'm a sucker for Trophy Dark incursions that start with poems. And this is a really, really good poem in this one. The introduction is excellent. It really, really hooks you. The writing is just so solid. I have a highlight that I wanted to read off. So one of the moments is a veiled figure in mourning black points the way on. When the hunters look again, they see only a gnarled black tree with one heavy limb. Isn't that great?
Yeah, it's funny because I was like, if Jason doesn't read the one about the where there's a person, but then they look back and it's a tree, I'm going to read that one. And
it's a great.
And it wasn't until you were done with it where I was like, oh yeah, that's the one I wanted to read. It is. The moments are really dark and beautiful. They're really.
I like this one too. Two bodies lean together in jocular embrace, smiles stretched taut on their bone-dry skin. Each holds a knife in the other's back. I mean, how great is that? There's so much story packed into those two sentences.
Mm-hmm.
I really love the writing. I thought it was so great. Anything else like stick out to you about it? Like the things you enjoyed?
I like the questions, and I like that the questions have a diamond bullet next to them so that you can find them easily when you're scanning when you're playing. That's just a nice touch. I think, I don't know. I feel like more game adventures need more interesting bullets in general. I just think that you're gonna read a bullet point. You're probably not gonna read a paragraph.
Yeah.
Or find a paragraph, but you might find that bullet. And there's one question that I loved, which is, who does the mob think is the leader? Which
nice.
Is such an interesting question. And you get to say interesting things about the world, about the characters. You get to say a lot by answering it.
Sets up a huge amount of tension in the scene, right? Yep. Because so the characters are faced with this mob, and the question, you have to decide who's the leader, right? It's great. It's a great question. Going back to the bullet point thing, one of the things I think is really great about this incursion is there's a tremendous amount of GM support in here. The level of GM support is so high. Like in almost every part, there's a real care and concern for how you should be running this incursion. The bullet points are an example of that, the way they're divided up. I think dividing the moments up by ring is a really interesting idea, because normally they're all together in the beginning.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, and so it's a thoughtful touch to divide them up by rings. So yeah, the GM support, so top notch. Really, really enjoyed that about it.
Yeah, I like that you start your character off sick as you're going into the forest and people are hoping for this terrible cure. Is really, really interesting. I just think it's neat. That's an interesting way to put pressure on your Trophy Dark players.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we leave this, I want to just say one more thing about it. Theme is so important in Trophy in general. And the theme of this one is promises. And I think that the way promises is incorporated into the incursion is really fascinating. An example is, in several instances, you find bodies that are strung up, and they have written on their bodies their contracts that they made that caused this to happen to them.
Oh,
right?
wow. Yeah.
Or that little bit that I read earlier about the two people who were dead and who had stabbed each other in the back. You got the impression that like they had made a promise to each other, you know, that kind of thing. So really love that. This incursion's top notch. You know, we ran that contest last fall, and if this had been in the contest, it definitely would have been a finalist. Like, it is worth your 5 bones, listeners.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really, really solid adventure. I was really impressed.
Into the forest dark.
So this is our theory and gameplay segment. Jed, tee us up. What are we talking about?
I wanted to talk about the way you set up the conversation around the dice in Trophy Gold in particular. I think it's really interesting. I think it sets up good technique in play and good the table behavior that you want to see. I don't even know if setup is the right word. Maybe demands. In order to pick,
demands be, yeah.
In order to pick up the dice, you have to say things that I think you want a player to say and ask things. And I just think it's really clever, and it's definitely had an effect at the table when I've seen it, and has gotten players actively searching and actively doing things you want your dungeon delvers to do, which is, you know, ask a lot of questions about the environment, use the environment to their advantage, look for ways to connect what's going on to their backgrounds. And I just think it's something that is well worth looking at, what you have to do to pick up the dice.
Yeah, it's a great topic. Maybe as a way of understanding the topic or moving through the topic, why don't we talk about, like, say, Dungeons and Dragons or Powered by the Apocalypse games and how they have you interact with the dice, maybe as a point of comparison. I think that might be helpful.
Okay. So this is not to say that good technique and good player behavior does not happen in D&D games, because we know it does.
It 100% does, listeners.
We learned
don't
this.
Send us any emails.
Well, I mean, and I think the interesting thing about Trophy Gold is it so clearly comes from a place where people played D&D and PBTA.
Absolutely, yeah.
And probably Forge in the Dark too. But yeah, so D&D, what do you do? Like, I want to hit the thing, roll D20, tell me what you get, right? Like, that's the dice conversation with D20, right, as I have experienced it.
It's very mechanical, right? It's mechanical and procedural,
right? PBTA, right? It's all about triggering the move, right? So it's about what the game designer is pushing towards genre-wise. So my character does something cool that the game is about. The MC says, oh, you trigger a move, roll 2d6 plus blah, and you roll the move, and you work together to figure out what that means. And both of those are fine ways to play. Jason and I have had tons of fun playing it, right. But this is obviously, clearly, a show about Trophy. So we're going to talk about what Trophy does and how it does it and why we like it. For example, I'm going to use a risk roll, which I think is the most lukewarm roll in the game. You can use it for a lot of things. So Trophy player says, I'm getting the F out of here. It's dangerous. The GM says, are you skilled? It sounds like you're risking your mind and body to get away. The player says, oh yeah, I have this skill, escape artist from my background. And yes, I'm totally risking my mind and body. I just want out of there, and I'm in a lot of danger. And then the interesting thing that happens next is we start a devil's bargain, and that brings the entire table into it, right? So whereas in some games, when one player is having a conflict, everybody can kind of sit back and think about how they're going to support them maybe in game, but there's no real reason for them to sit forward. Part of the roles, all the roles, maybe not a hunt roll, but almost all the roles is everybody starts talking about, hey, what kind of devil's bargain can you bring in? Yeah, it leverages the whole table, which I think is really interesting.
Absolutely. And I'll even say, even before you begin picking up dice, the whole table's involved because people have to offer their ideas for what they think could go wrong.
Yeah.
So already, even before you even go to the dice, everyone has to consider the consequences of what's about to happen, or the potential consequences. I like that because I'm a big proponent of this sort of out of character, in character, bouncing between them style of play. And when you ask players as players to talk about consequences, you are inviting them, as the GM especially, you're inviting them to be a part of the bigger conversation about the story.
Yeah.
Like you said, in order to get your dice, you have to talk about your skills. In order to get another die, you have to accept a devil's bargain, which means you must engage with what is essentially good table technique.
And I think it also gets us in the practice of the kind of table interactions we want, where someone can say, hey, what about this? And you can say, no, Like, that's not something I want in the game. And that's a vital part of gaming. Like, it's just,
Right.
It's such a vital part of healthy gaming where, so hopefully getting all that practice, when someone does something and you're like, wait a minute, I'm really uncomfortable with that. Hopefully that muscle has been worked enough through this practice that
Right.
it pays forward. That kind of conversation can keep going, which I really like.
It absolutely does. It is the risk roll especially, but even the hunt roll and the combat roll in their ways, but the risk roll especially really does encourage and promote and develop a particular play culture.
Right.
It's a particular play culture that says we're all involved. We all care about the story. Sometimes that means as a player, we have to kind of like take it on the chin a little bit in order to get a good story, right? And that's a particular way of playing. And to be totally fair, I think that philosophy of like, embracing danger or embracing complication, I think that definitely comes from Powered by the Apocalypse, right?
Right.
I mean, I think that we owe Powered by the Apocalypse games that we owe them that sort of philosophy, which is clearly baked into Trophy to some degree. What's interesting, you have a note in the notes, and I'm giving you credit because I don't want to steal the idea, but
No.
You have a note in there about D&D, which I thought was really fascinating, which was in order for you to get what we're defining as good table technique in D&D, it really just depends on the players asking the GM or the DM more about the world and the DM being ready to respond, right? Like there's nothing about the die roll.
Right.
There's nothing about the mechanics in D&D that encourage or support this style of play. And I think it's an important distinction.
And it's a huge part of, particular like OSR style play, where like one of the mottos of the many different sects of the OSR, one of the mottos
Right,
that I see on Twitter is, the answer is not on your character sheet.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That's because the answer probably maybe should be in the environment, and
Right,
so
yeah.
you want players to be asking questions. Wait. What does the stone look like? Is it rough hewn? Is it, whatever? And just to get an idea and get everybody on the same page. And it's valuable, but yeah, it's not baked in.
It's not baked into the roles for sure.
Right. And it is baked in particularly to the hunt roll, right? I mean, that is what the hunt roll is triggered kind of like a PBTA move when players start asking questions about the environment and start looking around and you realize, hey, wait a minute, this sounds like a hunt roll. Like it sounds like you're getting out there. The way that it almost operates for me like an old school encounter table where the player's out doing something. I don't need an encounter table for a specialized table, although you could make one that wouldn't be too hard to do for each set.
Yeah, it'd be super easy.
As you make an incursion. For example, I had a thing happen in the game where a player was going to scout ahead to this cliff face and set up some traps for this vampire they were going to ambush. And I knew that there was a Yeti that lived in those cliffs. And I was like, damn, I don't know if the Yeti is there or not. And I was like, you know what? Roll a hunt roll. Let's see if you encounter something terrible. You might, in my head, I'm thinking you might get mauled by a Yeti. But he rolled fine. He got his token. And I was like, you know what? That's fine. That just lets me know that luck says there's no Yeti out that night. It was hunting elsewhere.
Yeah.
So anyway, hunt rolls, it's interesting the way they work. I'm fascinated by it.
The three roles, the hunt roll, the combat roll, the risk roll, they all bake good table technique and they all encourage good play culture in their own ways. I think the combat roll is interesting because what the combat roll does is it says, okay, before we even do anything, you have to say how your character is vulnerable.
Right.
It's like the first thing you do. And that's just for the privilege, so to speak, or the requirement of rolling your weak point, right? So like there's nothing good here for the player, right? It's like, this is how I'm vulnerable and this is the number that's going to F me over. But yet in play, players love it. They love it. Like they love describing how their character is vulnerable because it creates dramatic tension, right? Like it's why we're playing. We're playing to be in danger, right? We're playing to have exciting moments. And so when you sort of put it on the players a little bit, it's a little bit in violation of the Sega principle, right? Which we're not going to go into that right now. But, but like old time G+ religion people will know what I'm talking about. But like,
heck, that goes back to old time religion Forge people.
Forge, yeah, true, yeah. But like for me, it's old G+. Even though like to some degree you're asking the players to define their own vulnerability, which is maybe not always great. It works in Trophy Gold because because it's more about flavor, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, and
than
you're not asking the players to create the monsters they're going to fight.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just like that. I like the way it stirs their thinking, and it helps the GM too, because when they define how they are vulnerable, it signals to the GM how the monster should behave. Right now, like when I run a trophy gold combat, I don't usually narrate anything. I let the players do it all. But sometimes I do kind of assert what the monster does, and I use what they've told me about their vulnerabilities. But in any case, it has an impact on the scene where everyone's defined their vulnerabilities, and it helps immediately in its way paint the scene for everyone at the table so that they can then get into the role play and they can narrate the scene in a way that makes sense. It's elegant as fuck.
And hopefully also another side effect that I could see is that, sometimes when players fail or they get hurt, you've got this badass warrior and they get ragdolled and they don't like it. But the player says, hey, I'm charging at this bear. And if you don't have this tool, you might say, all right, the bear just mauls you. When the dice don't go their way, you might just say, this bear mauls your ass. But if the player says, you know what, I'm charging at the bear, but I'm a big tough guy. I don't think the bear mauls me. I think it's the fact that all of our archers are firing and I might get caught in the friendly fire. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay, that's how you're interested in dying.
Right, yeah.
I think it also puts their mortality right on display. It's like, hey, this could be it. These dice are finicky and you could go. It's an interesting tool. The group I'm playing with haven't played these types of games very often, and they've got Devil's Bargains now. But this part, starting the combat and saying how they're vulnerable, is something that we're really having trouble with. I think as soon as they pick up the die, they're like, I'm charging in and I'm doing X and Y. And I'm like, whoa there, pump the brakes. Like, it's not baked into us yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah, it takes a minute sometimes for sure. But ultimately, and I think just to kind of circle back to sort of summarize our topic here, the die rolls in Trophy Gold, this is true in Trophy Dark too, but in Trophy Gold especially, they encourage and indeed demand good table technique. It's definitely a style of play you can bring to your other games. Is there anything else you want to say about this?
I found myself, when we were like, okay, how does this work? I would read like, okay, in order to pick up the die, the directions are really clear. You can literally read it out loud and say like, first, tell me this. Okay, now tell me that. Okay, pick up that die. Now do this other thing. Pick up the other die. Cool, roll. Boom, now we know the result. And it's so procedural that it's pretty easy to just read at the table.
I'm particularly immersed in Jesse Ross's game design because I've been dev editor on his other games and I've published some of his games. And this is his game design style. It's like every line is considered, right? Like every little line and every little moving piece like has a place and is doing something. So it's good stuff.
Thanks.
Let's go to the next segment.
Woven on the Loom.
So our theme for today is beginnings, and in this segment we create things for you listeners, things that you can use in your games, or in the case of the thing I created, so you may not want to put in your game. But anyway, it's up to you. So what's our topic for beginnings? What are we making?
We are making a monster who is at the birth of the world.
Oh, yes, so good. Okay. The way this is going to work, listeners, is that Judd and I have created, at least in part, a monster each that was there at the birth of the world. And we're going to talk about them. So tell me about your monster. What is it?
When in doubt, I tend to go biblical in Old Testament. So I made the serpent.
The serpent, yeah.
I gave it endurance 6 with the thought that I don't want it to be easy for one person to take it down. And if they do, I want them to have used weaknesses and really like use their environment to their advantage.
Oh, nice, yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking when I'm placing that endurance is like, okay, how hard is it for one person to take down, 2 people to take down? That's kind of where I was thinking. The nice thing about the monster creation is you have 6 things that the monster tends to do. So I have offers forbidden rituals hidden by great powers from mortal eyes, tempts player to destroy beautiful things, bites injecting venom that induces shame and self-hatred, constricts squeezing the air from your lungs bit by bit, supports dangerous sorcerous research, and tells you the true names of things.
Ooh, I like that last one especially. That's great.
Thank you.
Tells the true
then
names are power, right?
Defenses and weaknesses I have trouble with. So if I put question marks by mine because I just wasn't sure if they were good. Defenses like, ancient foul wisdom. Is that really a defense? I don't know.
I saw this and I'm trying to think how I would write it. So fell wisdom, I love that as an idea. Like, okay, terrible, dark, baleful wisdom, right?
Right.
How is it a defense? How do you make it a defense?
I don't I don't know. And so I'm not sure if I'm just...
I think this is how I would make it a defense. I would have it be something about like how it offers the treasure hunters valuable wisdom and insight in exchange for its freedom, I guess.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
because
that
it's
makes
only
sense.
endurance 6, so it can be taken down, like by pretty easily. So it has to kind of work its social powers.
Yep.
Now, I don't know, like, if there's a hard mechanic there, like they get a hunt roll token or something, maybe, I don't know.
Right.
But I think it would be something like that. That's what I feel like is happening there.
Cool.
But,
Awesome.
and what's the weakness you have here?
So the weakness I have is vanity.
No, that's good.
I tend to put in some kind of like emotional weakness in there too, if it fits. That was all I had for weaknesses. Now I kind of want to write an incursion, which is the players finding the ruins that was the Garden of Eden.
Nice.
But that was a lot of fun. One thing I would add to this is I would have a D6 table with brand new rituals.
Yeah, for sure.
These are the things the serpent could possibly
give
teach you.
Yeah. Maybe that could be the fell wisdom. Like it can teach you a ritual.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, and I like vanity as a weakness. That's pretty great because it's because it's sort of a social thing, right?
Yeah.
Like it would lead to some good role play moments, right?
So it's funny. I had a bunch of players in my Thursday night game go into a castle with an old mosquito-based vampire, and I had one of her weaknesses is boredom, which is she just doesn't have peers around.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, in my description, the players keyed in on that, and they were like, "She's bored." Nice. Like, let's go in pretending to be people who have different types of blood that she could taste. She's got to be bored down here. She has no one down. And I was like, how could they know that? This is nuts. It was interesting, like the way that they keyed right in on a weakness. Like they just jumped on it. So
yeah,
interesting.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
What'd you make?
I made, for my monster who was there at the birth of the world, my trophy gold monster is, the generic name at least, is a primordial chaos god.
Nice.
Okay, so I'm going as big as I can go in the first episode here, listeners. So the description of my primordial chaos god is it's a roiling mass of pure chaos energy, a nuclear explosion constantly devouring itself. The endurance.
This is awesome.
Thank you. The endurance of the monster is 13. Okay. Anybody who knows the rules well knows that that's not a possible number. Okay. Endurance is 13. Hold that thought. The D6 behaviors are really, the habits are really sort of habits of the world or of its followers, right? So I have the sound of manic flute playing somewhere in the distance. That's for our Lovecraft fans. Cultists tearing out their own eyes and tongues. A man claiming to be a reborn god king of Old Kaldur demands your worship. For 6 days and 6 nights and 6 days, dogs, cats, and other pet animals assume a submissive stance.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Everyone refers to the sun as the day star in normal conversation. I stole that from a Codex Miscellany, by the way. And the last one is all plant life within a 10-mile radius withers and dies. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
With this character's monster.
Yeah.
The defenses are godlike endurance. The only way to lower the monstrosity's endurance to 12 is to exploit all 3 weaknesses, more on which later. The other defense is shatter mortal. If your weak point is rolled, take 6 ruin. Now, yeah, all right. The weaknesses. So there are 3 weaknesses, and you have to exploit all 3 just to get the monster down to 12. They are weapons made from heartwood of the first oak.
Right.
Holy water prepared by the churches of 13 different sisters. Commandments spoken in the lost tongue of Old Kaldur. This monster is a lot.
I mean, this monster is a mini campaign.
This monster is a campaign, right?
Yeah.
And I designed it that way. I was like, what would a monster that is like your whole campaign, what would it be like?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I feel like you just park this off the shore of your city and then tell the players, hey, you should probably get rid of this thing.
right. Here's the roadmap.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was having fun with that. I thought that was really fun.
That's really awesome.
So listeners, we're going to throw it over to you now. If you have an idea for a trophy gold monstrosity that was there at the birth of the world, go ahead and write it up, post it in the Gauntlet forums post for this episode, and Judd and I will take a look, and we'll pick the one we like best, and just to make it fun, we'll send you a $10 drive-through gift card just to say thanks for participating and making a cool monster.
Awesome. And I will post not only the serpent, but I'll come up with some rituals, a D6 amount of rituals, so that
let's do it. We will have these monsters like available in the show notes for you to grab and do whatever you want with in your games. Well, listeners, that is our show. If you enjoy The Sixth Ring, we hope you will follow us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a rating on the Trophy Podcast. That would be great as well. The Sixth Ring is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. If you want to support this program and many other lovely programs, it is patreon.com/gauntlet. Supported financially, that is. I can be found on Twitter at JasonCordova6. Judd, where can we find you? Anything you want to plug?
Judd Carlman, he, him. And I do another podcast called Daydreaming About Dragons.
It's
and
excellent.
if you put in those search terms, you'll find the podcast, and you'll find a surprising number of people on Twitter who are daydreaming about dragons, which is both strange and also heartening to me. So that's nice.
Awesome. Well, that's our show. We hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Hello, listeners. I wanted to let you know about Codex Hearthfire, the newest issue of the Gauntlet's tabletop role-playing game magazine, now available on Patreon. Hearthfire includes Packet, a game about the transatlantic journey from Liverpool to New York in the 1800s. Can you navigate the troubled waters between hope and home? Respite, a game of comfort and companionship through adversity, explored via stories told around a communal fireplace between battles. The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soulless, a new mystery for Brindlewood Bay. Trophy Gold Hearthfire, a major expansion for Trophy Gold that adds new storytelling options to downtime and upkeep. 36 precarious places to make camp, 9 original illustrations, and a beautiful custom layout. You can get Codex Hearthfire in the Gauntlet Patreon feed by making a $6 pledge in July. Your pledge helps support all the great work we do in the Gauntlet, including our Gauntlet Open Gaming Weekends and this very podcast. Thanks.
Jason, I know that you ran a session of Trophy Gold a few nights ago. Any high points you want to talk about, or moments when the game's mechanics clicked into place for you?
I didn't know you were asking me this. I thought I was asking you this.
Oh, no.
Oh,
that's funny.
Editor, we're not keeping that in.
Okay.
Okay, so...
Yeah.
Give me a moment. Are you able to answer this?
Yeah, I could answer it. I figured we would both talk about it, so I've got a thing. Yeah.
Okay. How about I'll lead us in then, and let you do it. So
okay.
So let's go to the next segment.